Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the special meeting of the Local Agency Formation Commission of Napa County. May I have roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll start with Vice Chair Leary.
Here.
Commissioner Moeller.
Here.
Commissioner Painter. Here. Commissioner Ramos. Here. Chair Cottrell.
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Gallagher. Alternate Commissioner Khan. And let the record reflect that Alternate Commissioner Abu Damas is absent today.
Thank you, Brendan. I will ask alternate member Gallagher to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And next we will move to approval of agenda. Brendan, thank you for walking me through just some background on this. Just for my edification and for the commission's clarity, this is an item where the chair has discretion to approve the agenda, I believe, and we can also ask if there's any changes or ask for motion. So I'm just going to look to my colleagues and see if anyone has any additions or recommendations. Nope. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and approve that agenda. And now I will ask for any public comment. Do we have any public comment? We have none in the room and we have no other remote access. Okay. That brings us to item number 5, consent items. We have no public comment on the consent items. Do I have a motion or any questions on that?
I'll second.
Commissioner Ramos has made a motion and Commissioner Moeller has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, with that, we'll move to item number 6, public hearing on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-25 and draft work program. And I'll turn it over to Brendan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the Commission. This item is being continued from the Commission's April 8th special meeting, which was held here in Yountville Town Hall. A notice of continuance was posted the very next day on LAFCO's website, at LAFCO's office, at Yountville Town Hall, and circulated to LAFCO's email distribution list. On April 8th, the Commission received a preliminary draft proposed budget, which was prepared by staff with assistance from our Budget Committee. The Budget Committee is an ad hoc subcommittee comprised of, we have Commissioners Leary and Moeller assisting staff with the development of the budget. And the preliminary budget was developed with the Commission's strategic plan goal of greater independence in mind, which I will come back to in a moment. Notably, the Commission currently contracts with Napa County for several important services, including but not limited to personnel, accounting, annual audits, IT, payroll, and banking, for example. And the Commission's current strategic plan, which is included as attachment 3 to the staff report, includes a goal listed as goal number 3, which is to continue gaining greater LAFCO independence. And the action plan underneath that is to amend the agreement between LAFCO and the county to create greater independence. And please note that Commissioners Leary and Ramos are still serving on a separate ad hoc subcommittee working on this goal, so there is more to come on this at a future meeting. Going back to the preliminary budget from the April 8th meeting, that version of the budget included operating revenues and expenses, each totaling $913,362, which would cover all potential costs associated with transitioning the Commission to other service providers or bring the services in-house. And that included several one-time initial costs for various components of that process, things like purchasing new computers, software, licensing, so on and so forth. The intent was to provide the Commission with the necessary budgeting means to accomplish the goal of gaining greater independence, up to and including full independence from the county contracted services if the commission ultimately chooses that path. Several commissioners raised questions and concerns about the preliminary budget, resulting in many requests for more information and a handful of revisions to the budget. One of the requests was for the adopted budget policy to be reviewed for possible amendments at a future meeting, but that activity is not part of this item on today's agenda, but it is on staff's radar to bring back at a future meeting. Then on April 15th, the Budget Committee met with staff to review the Commission's questions, concerns, and requests as part of the development of the revised draft proposed budget before the Commission today, which includes operating revenues and expenses each totaling $853,574. And that results in a nearly $60,000 reduction from the preliminary draft, which I'll get into that in a moment. In addition, staff provided special notice to the county executive officer, the county assistant executive officer, and the 5 city and town managers about today's hearing and invited comments either in person or written in our consideration of the proposed budget today. So a summary of the revised draft proposed budget in terms of what has changed. Well, the most significant reduction is within the administration services expense account, and that reduction is primarily tied to staff salaries and wages. And in particular, the Budget Committee agreed to eliminate any expenses that might be construed as back pay for staff, which was a key concern that was raised during the April 8th meeting. And as you can see in the budget worksheet, administration services overall represents the majority of budgeted expenses. Administration services is actually under the services and supplies budget unit, which is confusing and very non-intuitive. And so within administration services, there are actually 8 sub-accounts related to staff salaries and benefits. And the reason why administration services is under services and supplies is due to the way the county recategorized those 8 sub-accounts several years ago for purposes of greater accounting efficiencies, because ultimately the county is charging LAFCO for the staff services, since we are county staff, and so we need to reimburse the county, and this is the most efficient way of doing that. And so while this accounting practice, it certainly does create confusion and in some ways a lack of transparency about staff salaries and wages, but it's the most efficient option under the current contract agreement with the county. And so with that confusion and lack of transparency in mind, staff presented, or I should say staff prepared a report for today's meeting that provides more detail than the April 8th version with respect to those specific expense accounts under this line item. And if you go to attachment 4 of the staff report, you will see the proposed expense amounts within each of those 8 individual sub-accounts for next fiscal year. And that attachment also compares those amounts to the current fiscal year amounts. Additional context and details for staff salaries and wages are provided in the staff report, as well as attachment 5. And the remaining proposed expenses that are reduced when you compare today's version to the April 8th version of the budget, those remaining expenses that are reduced relate to lower cost estimates that staff was able to secure for various services that are currently provided under the county agreement. It is important to note that this version of the budget would provide the commission with the means necessary to either retain the status quo with respect to the county agreement or transition any or all contracted services to other providers. So this gives us the greatest flexibility as we consider our options with the county agreement. And with regards to operating revenues, agency contributions from the county and the 5 cities and town comprise the vast majority of those revenues and are proposed to total $853,574. And the breakdown for each of those agencies is provided in attachment 6. That is your agency contributions worksheet. For those curious, the 5 cities and town had previously agreed to the proportional funding mechanism, which is based on each city or town's general governmental revenues and then also looks at their population. And on the topic of population, we are still waiting for the California Department of Finance to release the 2024 numbers. Those will be included in the calculation for agency contributions that you'll see as part of the final budget. So there will be some minor fluctuations there based on population changes. It won't affect much. And then one other item discussed on April 8th was the commission's fees and whether or not staff and the commission have looked at those in a while. Our fee schedule, it's not attached to the staff report today, but it will be part of the item that accompanies the final budget at the June 3rd regular meeting. And I did provide a calculation for the commission to see as a part of attachment 7. This shows what we call the fully burdened hourly rate, which incorporates all of LAFCO's operating expenses, and then basically it comes up with an assumption of how much staff time each of your 3 staff will spend processing an application. And the net result is that the hourly rate would be $200.51 if the proposed budget is adopted as presented today. And our fees are for applications are, it's another conversation we may need to have at the June meeting, but currently as structured, we have some flat fees where we have an assumption, for example, an annexation proposal that is exempt from CEQA. We generally know that will require approximately 30 hours of staff time to process, start to finish. And so we have agreed in the past to adopt a fee schedule that incorporates these assumptions that certain types of applications require X amount of hours, and then we multiply the hourly rate by those hours to get the fee. We also have fees that are at cost, and in those cases, for certain applications, staff tracks the number of hours spent on those applications and bills the applicant accordingly. Also, I'd like to take a moment to address 2 other key issues that arose during the April 8th meeting but did not result in changes to the budget that you see today. One relates to reserves, and so a request was made by a commissioner to draw down on reserves to the local policy minimum of 4 months worth of expenses. The Budget Committee did discuss this and considered it and ultimately decided to keep reserves intact to ensure that the commission does have that flexibility that it may need for things like special studies or projects, there could be potential litigation, nothing in mind today, but you never know when something may come up unexpectedly, and so that's really the intent of the reserves, is to provide that flexibility for special projects and protection against unanticipated lawsuits. And so our adopted reserves policy is something that we will explore more fully when that budget committee is brought back to the commission and is being updated. So stay tuned for more on the reserves policy. And then the other item I wanted to touch on is there was a request for footnotes in the budget sheet, and I tried to make that work, but it proved too difficult due to a combination of, one is simply formatting constraints. It would have created a very difficult to follow budget sheet that would have gone on to additional pages, and there's just no way to make it appear attractive and easy to follow. But also, there are so many potential footnotes that could have been added. Staff struggled to pick out which ones rose to the top that we should put in there, but there could have easily been 30 or more footnotes of relevant and important comments to make. So in lieu of the footnotes, staff attempted to address these issues as best as we could in the staff report. And due to timing constraints, we may have missed a couple items that the commission is welcome to bring back up today, and we can work on that for the final budget. So, with that in mind, the commission is being asked to provide direction to staff for any changes to the proposed budget that you see today and or the final budget that is coming in June. And then another quick reminder that state law directs LAFCO to annually adopt a proposed budget by May 1st and a final budget by June 15th. So time is certainly of the essence to make any further changes to the proposed budget that you're considering today. Now, final comment relates to a draft work program, which you'll see is included as Attachment 8. And that is based on the adopted strategic plan. This version of the work program, it essentially matches what you saw on April 8th with some minor formatting changes, a little bit of cleanup to make it easier to read, but any content that changed was really just limited to clarification and improvements, but no substantive changes there. Although one thing came to mind, that there was a request that we note for the studies, if those studies will be prepared in-house or by a consultant. And so the draft work program you see today does make a note of in-house or consultant for each of those studies. So with all of this in mind, staff recommends the commission follow the public hearing procedures, which are listed on page 1 of your staff report. And then also take the following actions, which can be considered under one motion or separate motions if desired. Those actions are to, one would be adopt the draft resolution to adopt the proposed budget with or without any changes, and that's included as attachment 1. The second action is to direct staff to circulate the adopted proposed budget to the funding agencies and the general public for review and comment. And the third action is to direct the budget committee to return with a final budget for possible adoption on June 3rd. The budget committee and I would be happy to answer any questions the commission may have. And with that, I'll hand this item back over to the chair.
Great. Thank you, Brendan. So the first item, I had just had a preliminary question for you. The updated salary for you as the executive officer is reflected in this document.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. And so then just to go through the actions here, I'll first open the continued public hearing and take any testimony. We have no public comment today. So I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to this board for discussion. And any questions for Brendan at this point or comments? Commissioner Ramos.
Thank you. I certainly do appreciate the greater snapshot into administration services and how it's broken up to salaries and wages. On the difference that appears on line 51,100, which is attachment 4, the difference of 32,000. Can you explain? In seeing that, I'm not seeing what that entails. Like, I know for county budgeting, we assume a 3% COLA going into negotiations, and I'm wondering, is that reflected here?
So yes, Commissioner Ramos, so there is a 3% COLA that is applied to all of the staff salaries. And we understand that's an assumption and not a firm figure. And so the remainder of the 32,000 difference, much of that is related to the executive officer salary, which
Okay.
if you don't mind, I'm checking last year's budget to see what that bottom line all-inclusive pay ended up being, since you don't have it in front of you. So just the executive officer salary, all-inclusive, is approximately $16,000 difference
Okay.
from
That
what was
makes sense
adopted last year,
Okay.
and then a portion for the other positions.
16,000, so 16,000 to executive officer, the remainder being a 3% assumption for a COLA pending negotiations.
Actually, to clarify, the 3% COLA is already built in to the proposed budget for next fiscal year. So,
In
so that-
salaries?
yes, and so let me check the.
So like the 32,000, that's what I'm trying to figure out where that growth is coming from. There obviously does need to be growth. That's not the question. I think more understanding 16% is for the adjustment of the executive officer, but what's the other 16?
I am looking at these numbers now, and what I'm seeing, so 16,000 executive officer, looks like assistant executive officer is about 11,000, almost exactly. And then the clerk junior analyst, the difference there is about 6,000. And so happy to provide more detail on those if it's helpful.
So those are the three. I don't do percentage.
So-
I don't do the percentage things well in my head. So those changes are just a 3% COLA assumption for 24-25.
Also a step increase for your clerk junior analyst, who is on step 2 out of 5, and we're budgeting for step 3 for Stephanie, and on the assistant executive officer for that position, we're looking at it's essentially a $5 an hour difference in the hourly rate for current fiscal year, between current fiscal year and what's being proposed for
But
next.
that's only a COLA.
The COLA actually is no. Well, no. So what
If
happens?
she's at 5, if she's at step 5, how are you assuming a $5 per hour increase if she's already at step 5 and we have no other step?
So what we have done, and I may want to ask my budget committee helpers to chime in if they recall this discussion. We had agreed that we would budget a salary for the assistant executive officer of we put $66 an hour, even though that does not fall within the county's salary system as it is structured today.
Then why would we do that? That's exactly the concern we just went through in another position. If it doesn't fall within the categories established from the county, when I look at a revenue and the county being 50% of the revenue that comes into this organization, we're essentially sitting here asking the county to pay for an out-of-class adjustment.
Yeah, I hear what. Well,
I think we're anticipating that similar to the county working with us to come up with a different title for Brendan, that maybe that would be a possibility. So a small amount has been put in for that. It's not a significant amount. It's an unknown, but it's a proposed budget. So that's why that is there.
I find this part very troubling, just because of all the effort we just went through and readjusting, and it really seems like a very backdoor way at trying to get. And I sit in the most uncomfortable seat, I think, at this point of this commission, being that I'm a county supervisor. I need to stick to those rules. I understand the commission's perspective on it, but that doesn't fit in the world that we operate in. And so budgeting for a change that is not allowed under the current MOU and process.
But I think your argument might be correct if you assume that this is a 2-year budget and that we are not going to go independent, and we would not perhaps, we are planning to, have looking at other places for some of these services that we now contract with the county. So looking out from a budget perspective, I think it's prudent. It's a small amount of money that, we anticipate what this agency is likely to spend. Also, with our work plan here too, that we know it's a priority to go independent. So I think you have to kind of balance a bit of projecting what's best for a 2-year budget and not focus necessarily on we're going to try to do this within the current system we're in, but making projections for the future.
Through the chair, I definitely do have that long-term view, but this is a budget, and budgets need to be accurate. And if that is the consideration, that is what reserves are for. You don't add extra into line items that are not supported by policies. And in fact, the reserves are already 78,000 in excess of the budget policy. And if in fact there is a change, whether it is a redesignation that happens through an equity assessment in the current model, or a change to go independent, and that change is necessary, this is what mid-year budget adjustments are for. When you go into a budget, the budget has to be supported by existing policies. And so if I see minimum reserves at 33%, and which is already a very high standard by GFOA standards. GFOA standards would suggest, my staff said 17%. This is a budget policy, so we should meet it until we reevaluate it. Even though I personally believe it's too high, that is the policy. But when we look at salaries under our current structure, there is no option to add $5 an hour to an employee. These are to make what is essentially happening here is to try and renegotiate a classification through a budget. There's a blending of issues. If that in fact happens, that's where you do a mid-year budget adjustment in January, and you clean it up that way to pay for that, and you appropriate into administrative services. But when I see this, I'm struggling with, is this a clear picture that is supported by policies? And I still don't see that it is.
Thank you. Beth?
Thank you for articulating that. I guess I am on. Sorry, I can't see it from behind there. We're going to be forwarding this draft budget to the county and the cities, and all the cities also contribute. So I think we're all kind of wear these dual hats, and so I think we need to be able to show how we're fit. We're in kind of an unusual position, right, where we're trying to fit within an existing system that we want to try to change. And I think there was long discussion at our strategic planning session about the benefits of going to an independent system. What I'm afraid of is that we run into some negative comments about trying to fit, a square peg in a round hole. And so, perhaps the better thing to do is to define and describe, and you've done a really good job giving us those breakdowns. I do really appreciate seeing that. The 3% COLA, I totally get. If we want to drill into the details, there's all of a sudden a car allowance that's on the list, and I'm not sure if that was on the list before. Is that something that's allowed within the structure? So I think we need to make this fit within the current structure we have, and then maybe, establish a means of moving forward towards independence. You gave us that laundry list. I wanted to almost write it down of all the things that LAFCO works on with the county. We need to go through I think a pretty robust and separate process to try to identify what we want to keep, what we don't want to keep, what's working, what's not working. All of that is really important as well. But I would tend to agree, what we're doing now is the budget. So we need to make the budget fit within the confines of what we're doing now, knowing that we do have a strategic plan that says we want to move, and that may cost us short term, it may save us long term, we don't know. But I think we have budget to do that because of how reserves are set up. So we may end up getting some confusing comments and setting ourselves up for some conversations that are going to be more difficult, rather than if we approach it from the standpoint of let's fit within what we have now and then continue the effort that we need to work on towards whatever independence looks like.
Thank you, Commissioner Painter. Commissioner Leary or Commissioner Muller, do you guys have questions or comments? And sorry.
After
Commissioner
Commissioner Gallagher, I do have some.
I'm just wondering if, I'm a little confused by the attachment 5 with the staff salaries and wages, and I think definitely making sure correctly before it goes to any jurisdictions. But for example, we have executive officer current hourly rate equals X, and that is called step 5. And then right below that it says step 5, July 2024 through June 2025, and that's another rate. So, okay, I guess to start, what is the correct step 5 hourly rate? And are you in step 5 right now?
Thank you. Yes, so when I put this together, I didn't realize how confusing this would be, but now I see it clearly. So the current salary, which was actually, well, the County Board of Supervisors just approved an item on Tuesday related to this. And when I prepared this page, it hadn't occurred yet. So, and that salary increase for my position will not be implemented immediately, or at least it won't show up for about a month. But before that salary increase occurred, my salary was $79.48, and at step 5, and I'm still at step 5 now. But there was a reclassification that occurred with my title. It's now linked to a different job title, which resulted in a higher salary. So,
So your current salary is whatever we approved last Tuesday. Okay, whatever number that is, and still at step 5.
correct.
Okay. Or because if it's a new title and classification, is it a different step system? Okay, got it. So then the next item I would expect to see would say, I don't know, this is a little wonky to me, but what I would want to see is like, what is your current, and then what is the COLA, and then what will the resulting, or, no, I guess not, yeah, because you're not moving up a step. So what you're getting is the COLA. So your current, what the COLA amounts to, and then the final number, right? And that would leave us with the final number for 24, 25. And I guess I would say the same thing for Dawn, because that also says step 5 at 6305, and then, then it says step 5, 66. So it's confusing. I understand it a little better when I get to Stephanie, because it says step 2 for current, and then it says step 3 for next year. And I don't know how the COLAs work exactly. Is the step adjustment made and then the COLA is applied to that? Is that how it works? Delia?
Brendan, do you have information on that?
Well, I believe it will depend on what date Well, actually, it's a great question that is probably better asked to county HR on how that would work.
Yeah.
Through the chair, it depends on someone's anniversary of the job classification that they currently hold.
Okay.
So the anniversary of the holding of the job determines the step increase, and COLAs happen on July 1.
Okay. So that's pretty individually, I mean, it's decided on the
Yes.
anniversary basis. So
There's a very big spreadsheet for that one.
yeah. So yeah. So given that there's also that added element, I don't know in which order you'd see it, but you would see a COLA on some number, and then you get a final, you would get a final hourly rate for the year that you're going into. So I think it just needs to be laid out really clearly for any of the other jurisdictions to take a look, because this is confusing to me, and I don't see how we get to the different number. It's not intuitive that we're going from this number to this number. And not knowing what the discussion was during closed session, I had thought maybe you all would, that's the piece you were working out, and that would inform the budget. And so I don't know if that occurred or not, so you all would know.
So that number, that 180,000 number, that is the number that
Okay.
was decided upon at that closed session. So the question about the COLA is a great one to just understand how that fits in here. So I think one of the things you're saying is it's great to have all this extra information, and that's making us have more questions about how this lays out.
Unfortunately,
but the nice thing, I mean,
I just
it's
think we're going to be asked by all the other jurisdictions. So let's make sure we know exactly what each number means, right?
Right. And back to Commissioner Painter's point that we need to be operating within the confines of our current system, I think is important. Commissioner Moeller or Commissioner O'Leary, I wanted to
Yes.
give you a chance to speak.
So I just want to make some overall comments about, I think what we're really talking about is the detail on the budget. So let me kind of start with how the ad hoc, what we do. We work with staff, and some have been in person, some have been in Zoom, and Brendan prepares. What we do, we work with Excel spreadsheets. So with Excel spreadsheets, you build in all this detail. So we look at all this detail. We ask all the questions that you're asking now, and we can kind of see it. It's like, well, if we change this, what does that do? We put the formula in, it does this, it updates that. We take a look at that. And with past commissioners, once the ad hoc reviews it, they've always asked for a higher level budget, which is pretty much what you saw at the last meeting. So it seems like now with new commissioners who are not on the budget committee and really haven't asked for that higher level budget, which has been asked for in the past, we're really asking for some different things now. So I think we need to be, once we resolve whatever discussions we have today, giving the budget committee, whoever that might be, and staff clear directions where you want to, kind of go in the future, because really kind of working through this, it is much easier kind of working through in a small group, a bunch of Excel files and changing formulas and seeing how that one line item that you're proposing changes and how it affects another one. And it's really kind of difficult to do in a more stagnant staff report. And so I can see, kind of the questions that you're having here, we kind of dealt with at the ad hoc. So that's just kind of how it all the pieces kind of work and you get here. So that's what, I think we should also make sure that we're giving what you want the ad hoc to do versus, if this is maybe this something in the future, that this commission really kind of wants to work through all that together during a commission meeting. Because I think it really will, if you had been at the ad hoc, kind of see how all that kind of worked in the explanation. So I kind of see kind of the hybrid there. So something to think about. And I think giving staff direction would be really helpful.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Leary, did you have comments or questions?
Yeah, I have it, but my pen stopped writing, so I'll just do it from memory if that's all right, if I can get everything correct. First of all, I'd like to address the detail in the budget. When I first came on the commission, the budget was a lot more detailed, and when Brendan first started, commissioners then were here for 10 years, or some of them, and quite understood the budget and everything else, so never did ask about all that detail that was there. They just want to see and what the exec recommended, and that's hard work. Now we have almost a totally new commission, and it is, right that you ask these questions because you haven't been here for 10 years or longer, and I think we had, I don't want to mention names, people have been here 15 and almost 20 years, so I can understand that, and I think Foresight would have said, oh, we should have thought about this and brought that up in our strategic in terms of what are your expectations for the budget. But we did not because we didn't see that. So I think it's appropriate to do that and ask for, and maybe 10, 15 years from now, we'll say, hey, we don't need all that detail. Now, what's so, I don't want to say convoluted or confusing, let's complex is the word about this budget, is we're trying to do three things. Well, our budget, yearly annual budget, to plan for going independent, and fixing the commitments we made to staff without knowing all the rules and things that we had to agree to. And we're talking about all three of those all at the same time, which can be very confusing. So it would be nice, once again, thinking back, to look at this in three separate ways. Strategically, and we decided that we want to go independent. So looking at the budget through that eyes and what we will need to do that in the current format. Then second, adjusting these salaries and looking for that and thinking about that separately outside of this and what we can do to do that. We've already agreed that we wanted to fix this. We wanted to stand by our agreement even though we didn't have all the information. We still said we wanted to stand by it. So I think that's the way we should proceed from here, is looking how we can stand by these agreement, manage within the current system, and if that calls for a drawdown on our reserves, then we can do that and utilize that if that is the appropriate and, should I say, what's better than the right way of doing it. Let's just be simple. The right way of doing it, the correct way of doing it, the right way of handling the people's money. So to summarize all of that, let's take care of our business. Let us handle our promises and work to do what we decided on in our strategic plan, is to go independent or go greater independence, because we are an independent agency already. So we're just trying to figure out how we do that. You look at Cortese Knox, it states we're independent. So we're deciding on where we want to spend our money. How do we get the biggest bang for the money we have to do the job that we want to do? So let's just keep going, and this has been a process. It's been a process, and it's been a learning process, and every time we come back in here, there's more detail and more information. But I sure would like to get this done within a year. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Leary. That was a great, I appreciate particularly the 3 steps that we're actually taking on, which is why this is more challenging. So I have a couple of comments that I wanted to make, but before I do those, I want to just remind us of the action item that we have before us is to adopt the resolution of LAFCO for adopting a proposed budget for the 24-25 fiscal year. So that's the item that we hope to get to a motion, a second, and approval of. And so I'm in favor of an adoption. I think we need an amendment on the point about the assistant executive officer's salary because it does, in my view, need to comport with our current context ecosystem, if you will. But other than that, I'm in favor of it. I do want to pick up on something that Brendan said at the very beginning, which I thought was a great point, that this budget gives us the greatest flexibility to retain our status quo or move forward in several different capacities toward greater independence. And I know for me, I'm still, I think we talk about exploring greater independence, which to me means we still have some learning to do to understand the pros and the cons of them. I hear, you mentioned at one point that it's not really transparent where we're looking for salaries, for example, and yet we can get to that, so some of these things too, how big of a con is it, or, and how big of a pro is it? I feel that I don't have that understanding yet. So I know in our strategic plan, we're saying move toward that, but in supporting this budget today, I just want to make clear, I have a lot of questions about what's the right place for us to land. I mean, frankly, I will say we have so much other substantive work to be doing, and I think this may be echoing where you went to. We're spending a lot of time, and staff is spending a lot of time on this question, and I'm not convinced that outsourcing accounting and auditing and payroll is actually going to lessen the staff burden. So with that caveat, we'll go ahead and move forward. I think the other piece that was covered, let's see, Beth, I think I talked about what you had said, that you made the point that we're wearing two hats and everyone's contributing. So as you say, Cortese Knox makes it clear we are independent, and we all have, wearing our other hats, are contributing dollars too. So what does independence mean? I think we have to have a conversation about that as well.
Could you mind if can we basically kind of just get our attorney to kind of weigh in on the two hats? I think it's always kind of confused me. I feel like sitting here, I must have my LAFCO hat on.
Yeah, I had one more point that I want to make, because I think this question about us, as a commission, having more questions about the budget this year. I was reflecting back on going through this process last year. And I think one thing that's different is this budget this year came in over 20% higher, right? So you'd hope anytime you have a budget where there's a big increase like that, there are more questions asked. So it may not be, the trend. It may be this moment that we're in, which makes sense because we're looking at taking things in a new direction. So with that, yeah, Gary, please.
Yeah, sure. I will just add, and this, for those of you who sat through the various LAFCO presentations when you joined, and you probably saw them at the LAFCO conferences, and you might have seen them from Cal LAFCO as well. This concept in a presentation on this is given. And so I hear you all using the word hat, because that's probably what the presentation uses as well. And so we'll continue to use that same lingo. So, in this role, you are acting as a LAFCO commissioner, and that is what you are doing here. It is true that you have other roles, and it's designed that way. The LAFCO and Cortese Knox is designed so that all of the different agencies have a voice in this process. So you are bringing information, and you are bringing a perspective from your other agencies, and intentionally so. That is how the system was set up. But here, acting on behalf of LAFCO, what is in the best interest of LAFCO in operating under Cortese Knox in making those decisions. So that's what we mean by the LAFCO hat. Yeah, you have lots of hats, but when you're here, you are LAFCO commissioner.
Thank you. And I absolutely understand and agree with that. And I really am looking at this from the perspective of what's the right path forward for LAFCO. But I think we also need to look at the formula that our executive officer already described in terms of how the revenues are divided up between the cities and the county. And just to be transparent, and as we move this forward, we have costs in our budget that are being transferred to the cities and the county for us to go through this exercise to become more independent. So I think that's where some of this cross connection comes from, so that we can understand how to move that ball forward in terms of independence. When you look at the revenue numbers, you know, I mean, I'll just use the city of Napa as an example. In fiscal year 21-22, the final budget was 166,000 and change. We are now moving to 267,000 and change. So in those 5 years, that's a pretty significant increase. So I want to be able to understand what portions of the budget as we propose, and like you said, budgets are there to be adjusted, and we'll do a mid-year adjustment, whether we can pull from reserves to do some of the work we need to do for making sure that we are doing the very best we can in terms of salaries, making sure we're doing everything that makes sense for independence. And I'm kind of with the chair as to, you know, which part of the menu are we going to be choosing from for independence, because I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a complicated endeavor that we need to take on. So I just wanted to be clear that a part of this increase that then is transferred to where our revenue comes from is because we're setting up a budget to move us more towards independence.
Serving on the Budget Adjustment Committee, this is what I had in mind and what was on my mind in thinking about. And I think I've even mentioned it in one of our meetings in terms of looking at what service we're going to use, what services we're going to keep. So in my mind, that's what I was doing, and that's what I feel the committee was doing. And as a commissioner, but not as a looking at what's appropriate in the county to be able to budget those kinds of things. Making sure that we will have the funds to be able to do what we needed to do, whether it needed to be research, going out and looking at different things, because for me, I want to get the best bang for our buck. And how do we get the best bang for our buck? We've got to go out and find out. You made a comment about staff time. Well, maybe, in my mind, I was thinking about, well, maybe we needed to pay someone, and I hate to use this, I won't even say that, the consulting word. Yeah. It's amazing what goes through the minds when you're having to say things that this lexicon just throws at you all the time. So those things were going through my mind in terms of getting to where we want to be. I believe this commission wants the same thing, getting the best bang for our buck. In my mind, it's going to cost to be able to do that. If we can't do it by putting things into accounts to do that, because that is not transparent, it's not open, our other stakeholders might not appreciate that or like that, then the only way to be able to do that is to draw down on our reserves and then look at our reserve policy later on. But I don't want to see this process bogged down. I want to see it move forward, and I want to see and be able to get the information to do what we want to do and what we agreed to do. Because the truth of the matter, it's all about optics. And if we are being contracted with everything from the county and we're using their budget system and everything else, the optics are, and if our exec is considered a county employee, The optics are, we're county. And these optics are very important in the public's eyes. So however we do it, it's that move towards independence that I think will be in the best interest of this commission and in the public's interest. So that's all I have.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I heard was that one salary chart that you've requested to be changed. Is that the only piece that needs to be modified? Because I know that we have a time number here that we have to have at least the draft in. So the question is that the only single piece, that salary and wages, that needs to be adjusted, clarified? And if so, then that seems to be a manageable thing. And I don't know if we do that here or we wait till June.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's where I was going. I think my suggestion would be unless there are other pieces, if someone is interested in making a motion with that amendment and we can clarify the details for Brendan or Gary if need be, so that specific piece is amended to reflect the current system that we're working in. Is there anyone who wants
I'll endeavor it. I'll endeavor to make a motion to approve the proposed budget with an amendment in the administrative services category to readjust to not include a discretionary increase on the assistant director's salary. Is that clear?
I think so. Brendan, is that clear enough for the change?
Yes, it is. I do want to add just a quick point of clarification. I misspoke earlier. I thought that that position was budgeted, or I thought that Dawn was at $61 an hour. Now it's 63 and change. Still, the substance of this discussion remains valid, but wanted to clarify for the record that the proposed budget increase would be about $3 rather than $5 per hour increase.
And is that clear to all the other commissioners too? If so, not sufficient.
It's just a clarifying question. So what you're saying is the adjustment in the assistant executive officer is really based on the COLA adjustment only, and that fits within the positions step and system right now.
I may not have quite heard the question right, but I'll do my best to clarify. So, the proposed budget as presented still has the problem of having 66 an hour for the assistant EO position. Based on the discussion we're having, that's going to drop to the actual step 5 salary, which is $63.05.
Okay, no, that clarifies. So in terms of the motion, it's looking at amendments to both the executive officer and the assistant executive officer as outlined in attachment 5.
Is it also changes to the executive officer piece of this too?
I said, no, go ahead.
To clarify, the executive officer piece is correct based upon the redesignation of that position and its internal equity adjustment. So the executive director is correct and that remains. On the assistant executive director, categories for the projected budget year would stay at the 63.05 rate and only have the increase of the COLA as opposed to, as it reads right now, going from 63.05 to 66 plus a COLA. So the two lines at 66 would go away because that is already a step 5 and the only thing allowed would be a COLA.
So there's a motion, and did you just make a second, Commissioner Painter?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. I have one question. I am going to go on attachment 4. I'm looking at the PERS retirement line item, and it goes from 79,000 to 109,000, which that's a, 25% increase, more than that. Can you give us a little bit of background on why that is?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Chair. So this was one of the embarrassing mistakes staff had made in years past. We simply did not update the proper the percentage factor that feeds into this number. We had lower numbers in the 18% range, which were accurate years ago, but that increased without our knowledge, and we simply didn't catch it until this year, and that's a pretty big increase. So that accounts for it, is just getting the correct numbers, which I did verify through our budget analyst over at the county executive officer's office.
Okay, so we would in future years not expect to see such a high percentage of increase.
Exactly, correct. Oh, and while I've got the mic, if you don't mind, I just want to point something out that, so based on the motion and the second, I've already put the numbers into the spreadsheet. If that was to be approved, then we would have a net operating difference of, it would be about $8,000 in the black, rather than a zeroed out balanced budget. Just want to put that out there in the event the commission wants to perhaps have a second motion to also reduce the agency contributions by that 8,000 and change number, so that we have a zero at the bottom, or we can address that in the final budget.
I'll turn to my colleagues and see if anyone wants to amend the motion.
I'll make that friendly motion, friendly change to, if it's okay with the first and the second.
I like friendly motions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
And I just want to add one other thing. During our last budget meeting, again, we drilled down into all this, including the PERS, and in terms of what sometimes the county would take a lot of these and kind of lump them, and I forget the category, and then they would kind of get plugged in. Then we'd use some old formulas that we had. So it took an extra step going back to the county, because the budget committee said that this commission wanted each one broken out. So it wasn't something that normally comes from the county, but we had to then kind of go back and do it. So that's why you see it here.
Great. Thank you. And I think that's the last thing I wanted to do before calling for the vote. I want to turn to the budget subcommittee and just say thank you, because it's clear you've spent a lot of time being thoughtful about this, working through and drilling down into the numbers, and that benefits all of us. So thank you for that.
Can I say one thing? It's, in my mind, in my understanding, it wasn't the salaries that started us down this road. It was, we wanted to create a account, a line item, so we could have it for our MSRs. Yeah. So we could see the money we had for MSRs, and we couldn't do it. And we said, why not? We just add another number right in there. Well, no, you can't do that. And so that's how we started down this line. And for us, or for me and the budget committee and commissioners, it was like, okay, well, we need something that's going to work for us. And so here we are. So let's create something that's going to work for us. All right.
I appreciate that, because you're bringing it back to the functionality piece. What do we need to do to make it function better? So with that, I will ask for a vote on the motion made by Commissioner Ramos, seconded by Commissioner Painter, as amended by Commissioner Mueller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
All right.
Right. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to Commissioner comments or requests for future agenda items. Anyone?
I just wanted to perhaps suggest, because there's been a lot of discussion with the last item, that we consider maybe having a workshop on the what going independent means, and what are all the different aspects of that. And during the budget, discussion, the ad hoc committee, it was very obvious that you can use the framework of this budget to really look at all the items that we're paying for now. And, you know, so it all the little pieces that we would consider maybe going to a different provider than the county for are really kind of laid out here. So I think that framework is kind of exists as kind of part of this budget. So using some of those headers, I mean, you know, who we would go to, what those contracts would mean, finding the right person, you know, all that, or you know, down the road steps. But I think really kind of looking at it from the framework of the budget line items would maybe, and staff might have some different approaches that they might want to take, but I think that could be part of the workshop that we kind of do. So Gary, does the workshop, does that need to be a notice public meeting, or what do we have to do? Do we have to?
You can attend, yes, it is a meeting.
Okay.
Yes, you have to have an agenda.
Okay.
The description would be workshop regarding, and then the topics that you wanted to talk about.
Okay.
It doesn't have to go into a lot of detail, but there just needs to be some detail, so that if someone was interested, they can.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's a great idea, Commissioner Mueller. And I also like the framework of a workshop rather than an agenda item, you know, where the goal is not to make a decision in that setting, but to learn about the pros and cons.
So one more legal question. So right now we currently have an ad hoc that I think was delegated with the same authority. So can we still have that? Do we need to get rid of that to have a workshop, or how does that work?
You can continue, it's up to the commission whether or not to continue with the ad hoc committee. If that's something you want to keep, you can continue, and it would not prevent you from having a workshop. So all of you could get together for the workshop and still have the ad hoc committee separately.
So perhaps at the workshop, depending on how our workshop goes, then we could make that decision at that time.
And
Or
we might-
maybe give more specific direction to the ad hoc. That would possibly be an outcome.
Yes, and if you want to do that after workshop, that would have to be agendized as something. So if you're giving direction or taking a vote or something, think through that. Or come back at your next regular meeting.
That is my sense, to have the workshop. I like the idea of keeping the ad hoc in existence. We do the workshop and then we bring a report out from the workshop back to another regular scheduled meeting. Then we can come up with potential tasks for our subcommittee. And looking at our subcommittee members who are,
I think that's I think this is all new territory for everyone, and we don't know what we don't know. So I think the more check-ins as a full commission, and then to be able to send us on our journey, and then reel us back in so we can continue this. I think what would also be helpful in terms of the workshop is to really chart out, timetables and goals of when something is, expected to be reported back on, but kind of also understanding order of what comes first, and then and backtracking from there.
And perhaps I can add to that too. I think it'd be useful to have our attorney there too, because maybe as part of that, or maybe the beginning of it, I think we should really review what we call the SSA, what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I'm kind of suggesting, kind of elements of the budget would be like, where are we going tomorrow? So I think, because I'm not sure if everyone's really familiar with the SSA.
so that might be one task for the subcommittee, is to work with staff on that agenda for the workshop. I think that would be helpful. Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to weigh in. First of all, I think that's a really great direction and good suggestion. We only meet, 6 times a year? So if we don't do it under a special workshop, I think we're going to all of a sudden be in 2025 before we know it. So if this is, and we've laid this out as a goal, then we need a different mechanism to try to get there. So I appreciate that, and to the subcommittee to move us forward.
And it also kind of helps me, kind of one of the columns in our work plan related to going independent says ASAP. So this is my response to ASAP because I didn't really know what that meant. So there you go.
The other comment I would have is we just coming out of closed session, we get our hardworking alternates at every meeting, and then we, in a closed session, we currently don't have alternates sit in on that, which can be, I mean, I think Commissioner Gallagher, you pointed out that you didn't know how the result of the closed session was. And so it would be, I think, useful to understand if we can include alternates in a closed session for a future agenda item. Thanks. All right.
I'd like to say something, and this, I'm saying this not to say I told you so or something like that, but for my own what I'm looking for. Now, during our discussion for ad hoc, I brought up a workshop because I thought and I saw that's the way we should be going. Because this is however, I didn't push it. And I'm saying this to myself, so when I feel or see something that I feel is the best direction, I need to be stronger. I just need to push it harder because this is, and I said, it's just more and more complicated. And so we're there, and that's the most important part. But in the future, look out.
I think you could say I told you so. I think we'd be okay with it.
All right.
All right, with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.